content over everything.
I saw you up on the platform earlier.
Yes, I was having a bit of rabble, having a bit of shout off.
What did you speak of?
Well, about Brexit and about anti-Semitism and something which I could lead on to here, actually. As a social democrat and you as a socialist, we've hung on to the Labour Party over many years. I'm well aware of that. But it wouldn't be the first time if I voted tactically in Orpington.
Tactfully instead.
Tactically in Orpington, which is Joe Johnson's seat. He's standing down, as you know, brother of Boris.
I didn't know.
Well, he is. Anyway, it wouldn't be the first time I'd voted Liberal Democrat in Orpington, because Labour will never win, our party, you might say, would never win in Orpington. So why not? Surely you would agree with me, it would be in order for me, as a Remainer also, a strong Remainer, got the flag in here somewhere, to vote tactically and vote Lib Dems, because the Lib Dems became within about 300 odd votes in Tony Blair's era of taking the seat. So
there will be a lot of people
tactical voting
who ask themselves questions like you're asking and vote in that
You wouldn't surely advise me to...
It's not something I'm going to advocate.
Well,
and if you think about it logically, it's not really something either Labour or the Conservatives would ever advocate, as long as they are the two largest parties.
The main parties.
It's extremely unlikely they would ever advocate such a thing.
But you wouldn't privately tell me, you wouldn't give me private advice on that, because you've
got your own brain, you've got your own opinion. I'm not going to tell you
I've
how
done
to
it.
vote like
I've
that.
done it
I'm
before.
arguing what I want to argue.
Yes, I know. Yeah. I've done it before.
And if I was to do anything else, it'd be foolish. Everyone's making localised deals everywhere.
Just a talking point. You see, I campaigned for Emily Thornberry, and I campaigned for Una King in those parts of East London, and then went back home to vote Lib Dem, which I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And also, I voted...
But I know this is tactical machinations.
Well, call it what you like.
I really want to get on to
the subject.
Fundamentals. Yes. And that is why people should vote Labour and what Labour represents. And an illustration of that is one of the demands I've got here. It's just a poster. I'll be putting up posters of a similar nature dealing with the fundamental issues. As you remember, each week I've tried to raise a couple of subject matters which focus on the election campaign and on what Labour is advocating. Last week, or a couple of weeks ago, I was arguing about that they should support an election. Last week I was arguing about how Labour can win the election. And that is by focusing on the youth vote. You can check online and check the video of what I said during that meeting. This week I'm going to focus on the key questions around which Labour will be able to mobilise and galvanise support amongst the youth, which is where we have our strongest base of support, in order to either win the election outright or get the largest number of seats in the election. And I think so far, although not a huge swing, all the polls since the election began have been showing Labour rising in the opinion polls and gradually catching up to the Tories. And I think that the latest announcements, for example, on Labour's digital policies, have been able to, or will be able, to further galvanise and strengthen support for the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn. In particular, what's been worked on recently is this document called the Digital Democracy Manifesto. Now, people who've grown up in the digital age, in the communications and technology age and the internet age, will understand the core issues that are being discussed. First issue that made the headlines this week, and I'm glad that they announced this proposal, was that Labour, if they're elected as the government in this country, will provide high-speed internet based on fibre optic connection to every household in the country. And we will provide this for free. Now, there are various people who have attacked this proposal. I noticed Boris Johnson said this was communism, some sort of madcap communist idea. And I think that's, well, apart from the madcap, there is an element of truth to it. It is a communist proposal. Just the same as in 1945, a communist proposal was introduced by the Labour Party in the first post-war government, the first majority Labour government in history. And that policy has remained the bedrock of what British society is up until this day. In fact, the Conservative Party is trying to gain votes from the Labour Party based upon defending that communist principle that Labour introduced in 1945 in the National Health Service. Not only, by the way, in the National Health Service, but also in education, where they provided education from childhood up until 18 years of age and beyond for free. Now, what we are proposing is a radical set of demands which will provide the foundation to democratise the internet, to utilise the resources. Don't forget, the internet emerged as a state-funded programme to connect together computers electronically in the event, developed by the American Army in order to protect itself against nuclear war. They wanted a mechanism of intercommunication that would survive being knocked out in one area or another. We, however, have entered into a period, in the last 15 years in particular, in which the internet has become a battleground about the future of humanity, whether it be Cambridge Analytica manipulating votes, whether it be discussions about the future of privacy on the internet, whether it be about surveillance mechanisms monitoring and controlling where people are, whether it be about WikiLeaks and the arrest of Julian Assange and the threat to export him to the United States of America, whether it be laser-guided missiles raining down on people in Iraq and Afghanistan, whether it be technologies of surveillance, such as Edward Snowden exposed, that Microsoft, that Facebook, that Google, that Yahoo, and the tech giants have been utilising to provide information to the American Secret Services and what's called Five Eyes, Britain, Canada, the United States, New Zealand and Australia's intelligence agencies, passing information to the governments and gaining that information from private entities. We are proposing a digital manifesto to change the balance of forces between the public and the private in relation to data and information, and also between the public and government in relation to data and information. As things stand, if I pull out my mobile phone, where is it? Ah, there it is. And I go on to a search engine. And I think I'm going on Google here. So I'm going to a simple search on Google. When I type in here on this phone computer, and I type in, for example, Speaker's Corner. When I type that in, does that typing of mine on my device belong to me?
Yeah, it should.
It should, but it doesn't. When I type on my computer, on my mobile computer, it belongs to Google what I type in there. That's why when you type in something about your health, a couple of days later you'll have 15 adverts in your email. Or you go onto YouTube and you've got an advert thrown at you about some ailment you might think you might have or the symptoms indicate towards. So in other words, we have an era in which what we do on a daily basis in our everyday personal lives has become the property and mechanism for private accumulation of giant multinational corporations dominating cyberspace, which is how a significant or even a majority of our human interaction today is organized. And the consequence of that is that more and more economic and knowledge power has been transferred into the hands of a tiny elite of giant multinational corporations like Facebook, Google, Yahoo, the BBC and others entities which most people use in Britain as mechanisms of finding information and mechanisms of communication and mechanisms of information discovery. So what we are proposing is to go back to the fundamentals of the internet, which was firstly publicly financed, publicly developed, secondly ran on what was called free software, software that belonged to nobody and was created by collective endeavour, in which each layer of the process of information construction in order to make a machine, whether it be a camera, a robot, an aeroplane, or a mobile phone, or a rocket ship, or a nuclear weapon, all the machinery that is governed in its actions, mechanical actions, driven by data combined together in software, strings of zeros and ones that give commands to machines to do things on behalf of human beings. That structural software should be built on foundations that nobody owns. Because once you seal off that information into private proprietary property, it means that the machine and what it does is dominated by private sector interests for 20, 50, 60 or more years. Even though the actual viability of that software program to make the machine move in a particular way is only really likely to survive as a copyright knowledge for perhaps 3 months, 6 months or a year. But they superimpose and pile one on another a legal framework of capitalist proprietary interests, which they call intellectual property, and thereby corner the world, the digital world, by which we interact with the rest of the world and by which we interact with machines and machines interact with us. And therefore we're talking about returning to the fundamentals on which the internet was founded, and that is the free software movement. That free software movement governs to this day 80% of electronic mail communication is organised on what's called send mail. In fact, even these machines that they make out are somehow the wondrous creations of the private sector. In fact, you'll discover that all the components, from the touch-tone screen to the processing system, the microchip processors, the communication systems, all of these things were developed by the state or by the military, which is also the state. So in other words, it was public sector investment that laid the foundation for these technologies that the private sector is accumulating into its hands as a mechanism to dominate the world. And that's not an accident that in the last 20 years, as if out of nothing, seizing control of this public sector domain has become the battleground between giant multinational companies that nowadays dominate the Nasdaq and the world stock markets. Google, Alibaba, Facebook, and the giant corporations dominating the internet infrastructure are the wealthiest company, or many of the wealthiest companies in the world. One example of the dangers of this are illustrated by a proposal by Facebook. In fact, they are planning to introduce this next year, and that is called Libra. Now, Libra is a currency about to be launched by Facebook, which seeks whether intentionally or not, seeks to control the entire money of the world, because they're creating a digital currency that they will then, in theory, provide to 1.5 to 2,000 million people on Earth who do not have bank accounts. And through their mobile phones, they'll have access to a currency called Libra, which will be backed by the 6 largest currencies or most powerful currencies in the world. Now, in that circumstance, let's say in January 2021, or 2020 better said, in January 2020, if you live in Argentina and you suddenly have access to Libra on your phone rather than the US dollar or the Argentinian peso, then what are you going to do? You're going to move your money into Libra, backed by the most advanced capitalist countries' currencies, rather than use a currency which is fluctuating rapidly and probably declining. And therefore it is a battle about the future of world economics that we are fighting. That is why we must lay the foundation, the principal foundation for a new society based on the new technologies available and used by man today. That means that areas that previously have seemed, if you like, fundamental criteria of democracy, the idea, for example, that you go to the ballot box on the 12th of December and you go into a room and there you're giving a piece of paper when you give your name and address. And then you go into a little booth and you cross a piece of paper and put it in a box. Or you vote for Brexit, for or against Brexit. And then the whole population is told, this is the most important vote in your life. And then you go to vote in June 2016 and you cross a piece of paper and you say, I want Brexit, I'm opposed to Brexit. That, however, is not a decision-making structure with affinity to the present level of technological development and democracy that we are able to introduce in the modern era. That's why we propose there should be a digital citizenship passport where every person in Britain who so chooses can create an online identity. All the information and activity they engage in with the external world through the internet will be in what Berners-Lee, the inventor of the World Wide Web, used to say would be a private pod. None of that information, whether it be what you search, what you do, how you vote, what you look for, what information you learn about, what resources you draw on, it's what you purchase, none of that would be public domain information unless you choose to make it public domain. And therefore your privacy would be guaranteed. Whereas now, none of your information is private. Not only is it not private, but the large corporations own it and marketize it. So everything you do on the internet today belongs to private corporations rather than to you. So while you may think you're searching for something, you're actually working. After your working hours, you're working for them. Whether you consider, whether you're sending a message to your friend or whether you're searching for some product, a pair of shoes to buy on the internet. And therefore what we need to do is to capture the conditions which exist in our modern era and recognize what the conditions are and then create these private pods where all people in the country can not only own their private data, and if they need some money or if they want, they can sell some of that data to the private companies if they want to. But if they don't want to, they don't have to sell anything to them. And in that way, the machines and the data communications and the construction of data knowledge, one on top of another. It looks like this, if you like, from the year 1960s. Your data would be a few ones and zeros somewhere, perhaps on a national computer, which might store some elementary data. By the 1990s, they were already creating huge data piles, if you like, constructed one on another, privately owned, although a significant proportion at that time was still publicly owned. But today, if you imagine a comparison in scale, if this is the data they held on you in 1960, now the data they hold on you individually, would cover an area the size of central London. Now, what does that mean? That private data is used as a mechanism to accumulate capital from you and to use data against you, to manipulate you, to twist what you think, to manipulate you, to prepare to dominate other countries, to manipulate whole countries, to manipulate whole societies. Look at what happened in Bolivia last week when they overthrew the government with an information campaign organised by the United States State Department in conjunction with local semi-fascist thugs who've taken over the running of the country today. That is the consequence of utilising this mass of data that each of you has created or has been created around you to manipulate the world's population. And we are saying, by providing security for the people, we can do two things very simply. One is we can abolish the present form of elections, and we can introduce direct democratic control over our everyday lives on an everyday basis, just the same as you go online and you look for a pair of shoes on eBay, or as you go online and you try and find a doctor who can advise you on your illnesses. So we should be able to go online and make a decision locally, for example. If we don't approve of the behaviour of a member of parliament, call a petition online and bring them down. If we don't approve of local government's administration of fire hazards, such as we've seen in Grenfell and we saw in Bolton yesterday, we should be able to demand that there's a nationwide investigation into the safety of cladding on high-rise blocks all around London and all around the country. There are private companies who've been packing students into empty office blocks and then cladding them with a bit of coloured cladding, dangerous to their lives, death traps in reality. And yet, nothing is done about them. What we need to do is to model, using, for example, Google satellite technology. We can model the existence of the dimensions of the buildings. We can analyse on a computer basis using computer programs. We can analyse all the buildings in Britain which are dangerous, and then we can apply to produce enough staff, workers, and inform the people in the buildings to monitor and check the safety and health hazards and inform the fire brigade to go and do checks on those buildings. In fact, in Britain, there are many laws which are progressive and useful about these issues. The problem is, as soon as you actually contact the fire brigade, when you've got 500 buildings in central London that are death traps, to get round to each of those buildings, there aren't enough staff to do so. And therefore, we need to plan and model the society we have electronically. We need to have physical models and intellectual models of how society functions. And then we need to provide the mechanisms for the population to directly participate in administering the structure of society that exists today. The largest companies in Britain, 150 of them, control 70% of the valuation of the stock market today. Those companies can be modelled, their data, their information, how they operate, who works for them, how they interrelate to the economy. All that can be modelled on computer systems, and people can have access to those models to be able to determine how society moves forward, so we can plan collectively, online and offline, how we develop society to meet the needs and aspirations of the people. which will include a national education service available from birth till death for the entire population for free, so that anybody leaves a job, they can go and find another job by learning new skills that allow them to participate within society and to engage in society in the ways that meet their cultural, individual and educational level. And if they need to improve their education in one field or another, they will be able to do so. Every child in Britain should be able to raise their consciousness, their understanding, their intellect, not to go to university to get a good job, as they call it, but to go to university, no matter what age you are, to go to university and learn the latest ideas in science, technology, medicine, so that we control the future of this data, which is our data, our children's data, our grandchildren's data, data about humanity, data about the planet, data about the economy, data about the ecology, so that we can participate democratically in reorganizing the world to serve the needs of the people. And in that way, I believe that the programme put forward by the Labour Party in the last week and more, and in the coming manifesto to be published this week, constitutes the most radical proposal for democratic transformation of society since 1945 and before. And it will allow us to gain control not only of the past data, which is produced by us or about us, but also of the future of data. And firstly, let's get this clear. We are on a transition point, a cusp of a fundamental revolution in the technologies connected to human beings. The machine, just the same as in 1995, when the first laser-guided missile was used to kill a single identified enemy. His name was Dudayev. He was head of the Chechen rebels in Chechnya, fighting against Russian forces. And Boris Yeltsin, at that time ally of the West, he used a laser-guided missile because the guy used a mobile phone. He was in negotiation with the Russian government. He made a mobile phone communication to the Russian government. They identified within 20 meters where he was from this mobile phone. And then they sent a laser-guided missile and blew him up. Now that is nothing compared to the technological capacity of today. Not only in the sense of targeting someone to attack them physically, but also because the machinery and equipment that in those days was great big, gigantic machines to achieve these objectives. Now the machinery is getting smaller and smaller and smaller in the nano level. Nano means 1,000th of a millimeter. 1,000th of a millimeter is thousands of times smaller than the human hair, invisible to the human eye. And yet we are producing robots that enter the human body. And in 20 or 30 years' time, these robots and nanotechnologies and biotechnologies being developed by the largest corporations in pharmaceuticals and artificial intelligence today. They are being developed in a way that will allow those who are 20 or 30 or 40 today to live perhaps for 100, 200, 300 or 400 years, because the technologies to replace the organs in their bodies that degenerate will be in place in a few years' time. I took a group of King's College neurology experts around on a walking tour last week. They were telling me the following. They are researching as the human brain degenerates. Once you're past about 25 years of age, the human brain begins to degenerate. You begin to lose more cells than you gain. Neurons in the brain, which are what allow you to think. material chemical processes in the brain are what thinking is. Now, those thinking processes, basically, as the brain degenerates, your ability to compensate for the loss of those materials begins to decline. However, now these students are telling me at King's College in London, at London Bridge, Guy's Hospital, they are developing mechanisms to regenerate the dying cells in the brain. And therefore the human brain, the last frontier of human knowledge and human investigation, is coming under the ambit of reproducibility, of maintenance, of sustenance, of reproduction. And therefore, if the human brain can be maintained, nurtured, developed beyond the normal lifespan, then every element of the human being, which are less sophisticated, that can apply to as well. And therefore, what we're on the cusp of is a fundamental revolution in the relationship between man and science, and man and data, which will be, if you like, the repository, the library of data, stored in minuscule objects, accessible to the human brain. Just the same as this object. Using this object, I can look up any scientific or technical paper, or cultural or idea, or almost any person in the world, and I can communicate with them via video, or I can communicate with them on ideas, or I can produce a three-dimensional object to share with them that they can print out where they are, or I can print out where I am. So it is that as this technology becomes smaller and smaller and is integrated with the human brain, we will need to control those technologies and the information driving them. And that is why we are proposing revolutionary transformation in the relationship between the people and their data, and the people and the data held about them. So first we've proposed free and universal access to the internet for all. That can be done very quickly by putting Wi-Fi stations around the country on lampposts that allow everybody, everywhere, to connect to a higher speed connection than we have today. Second, that can be done by taking control legally over the data held by these giant corporations. And believe you me, most people don't want Facebook to have 30,000 pages of data about you that you don't even know they've got. Nor with Google, nor with the other companies. Just recently it was shown, Google is taking data illegally from the NHS about your health. So we need to control this information about us and to utilize the capacity of man to shape the future of humanity, not only by physical labor in the sense of making material objects, but also mental labor, our cultural creativity, which exists not only in the sense of I produce a document or a video or a body of ideas, but the entire intercommunication between human beings on Earth, which has been exponentially developing since the 1990s. We need that information, that past knowledge, to be at the fingertips and disposal of man, and the wealth created by it to be at our disposal, at our control, and serving those who produce it. You and I, ladies and gentlemen. And democracy will be radically transformed by providing a digital democratic structure to the society, so that everything from workplace elections to decide who the most competent people are, or who you want to represent you in health and safety, in education, in managerial structures, in supervisory structures, people should be able to go on to their internet connection, which is a personalized connection, connecting as they wish to the rest of the world, and to use the information to serve them their family, their community, their society, and in the end, the world. Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen. Vote Labour on December the 12th.
Very good. I really like these technologies.
This is what we're dealing with, the future.
I love it. Do you want to?
Small, they tend to
Nano.
the humans.
They can put it in, yeah, they can. They're really doing it.
They're doing it.
Well, Elon Musk had a project last month where they put 1,000 probes into the brain. They hold your brain in place.
They done
They already do it. And these are probes that are so small that they can just fit straight. You don't have to do it. You don't have to open the head. You just fit the probe in to a certain area of the brain, and then it'll electrically be stimulated.
You mean on the skull?
Inside. You go through the skull into the brain.
In the brain.
And then the brain, initially this is being done in the name of helping those who are paraplegic or something like that, so that they can then move machines, just like, what's his name, the Time Man, the what's his name, who's the astrophysicist, what's his name again? The guy who had spoken to the machine. Stephen Hawking, like him. So they want to facilitate, initially they say they're trying to help those people. But actually Elon Musk has got far wider ideas. He's the guy whose machinery this is, and he wants, basically, he has a vision of us downloading the brains of human beings onto computers forever. And then they will use these for themselves. So these big companies will use the data for themselves by exploiting your brain or my brain,
So
which they will then...
You're going to lose totally your own control.
That's the point.
They control you.
That's the point. That's the point. That's the point. And
All
already
your life.
the big
You
data,
cannot
in
make a
theory,
decision
and they're not only that, but they're also saying computers will become so advanced, I don't think it's actually accurate, but computers become so advanced that they begin to, or that they're superior to human beings. Now, it is true that a human being, for example, playing chess against a computer, now even the best chess player, the greatest grandmaster, will lose against a machine now. So in that sense, data has, or the capacity of artificial intelligence has replaced human capacity. And in theory, in 50 years' time, it will be far faster than that and far superior to that. The question is not so much can data surpass human beings, it's what should happen to that data. How should human beings control the machine, or the machine control the human being? Or better said, what a reality is that private interests control the data and therefore exploit humanity with enormous advantage.
See, if you had a Labour government, if I was a Labour minister, I'd say, okay, we're going to nationalise the
They
railways.
should put kind of a system for everybody know about their own data.
Yes. That's what we're proposing in Labour's digital manifesto.
And my second question was when they put that the things in the brain. My question is that will have a huge impact with the function of other organs in the body.
Possibly, but we don't know, because I mean, if your brain can then do things it couldn't do before, then possibly it might be a potential positive thing. But the point being, it must all be controlled by the people themselves, not by.
I don't somehow think they'll get. I would be controlled by the giant corporation, as you said.
Exactly. That's why we need to change it.
I think it would be a choice in life.
Exactly.
If they like me to do something, they make me to do it.
Or
They don't like
they make
me
you
to
think
do
you're
things.
deciding to do it.
And maybe a lot of voters...
I mean, look at today, the election, the general election today. Although the news media on television and radio are now more equal than before, because there's an election legally, they have to do that. Everywhere you go, the newspapers are all against Corbyn. So how can you say there's a fair election? The newspapers are all against, in one league, a big row, all against Corbyn. And then they have a TV programme on the news look at the newspapers. So then you have a couple of people all against Corbyn talking about what's in the newspapers all against Corbyn. Well, that's fine. But basically, but there's an uneven balance of power. And so...
I'm originally not from this country, but I'm privileged. But the thing is, what I noticed in this country, everybody wants to voice over on the other one. Whether they want to control over even individual, even in there's no intelligent discussion in
Not
here.
much.
No. When you talk about, and they just shouting and you want to voice it. So imagine from that point, it goes high. So it goes
I think it's the other way around.
That's very bad.
I think it starts the other way around.
That's very,
It's because
bad.
it's normal for you to be talked over by, let's say you go to work in a place, McDonald's, the guy says, do this.
You know, in my culture, if somebody shouts through discussion, they count that he is very impolite person, immoral, and he get a big trouble. You have to have a very slow, intelligent discussion, not like these people. No, I come across it.
What is your culture?
No, I'm Kurdish from Iran. Kurdish, yeah.
Can we have a photo? Just this photo.
Take some posters.
No, I wanted a picture. I was going to put it up on the website.
Do it.
You stand there, let me hear.
Oh,
Hello,
he wants a photo. Take a photo for him.
She's already been informed.
Oh, sorry, it came. Just put it down.
There you go. Whatever you see.
I'm on it, but in the right, but not in this direction.
I have to go a little back.
Can you just stand?
Little backward.
Come take away everything from your humanity.
God, man, say it straight. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV. Listen!
I think they did it once. I think they did it once in the 1990s, especially with universal credit. No, you can actually work for 5 hours a week. You're not unemployed. Well, I think that's basic dictionary definition. But you can still get universal credit.